Breaking news. The Tea Party is a terrorist organization. Haven't you heard? The words resound from one end of big media to the other. Hostage takers, suicide bombers, this Hezbollah faction. The Tea Party Republicans, said New York Times columnist Joe Nocera, have waged jihad on the American people. And then there's the Vice President of the United States.
The mainstream media has just... Seriously, no, and actually, I guess Joe Biden. Did Joe Biden call?
He denies it. He's denying that he said that.
Dreadful, says Scarborough, if Joe Biden actually called the Tea Party terrorists. But when does dreadful become inexcusable? I'm James Poulos. This is Reform School. The whole new tone is dead, yes, but how dearly will the left pay for this nonsense, and how much worse can the rhetoric get? Our panel today, Alyona Minkovski, host of the Alyona Show on RT, and Guy Benson, Town Hall's political editor. Alyona, let's start with you. Look, we both love a good partisan boxing match here, but Obama and Biden need to condemn this language, don't they?
Well, the White House already came out and said that they don't support this language. Joe Biden is, of course, denying that he ever even said that. So when you're talking about condemning this language, I'm not sure if you're talking about what reportedly Joe Biden might have said or what we see perhaps columnists in the New York Times writing, which in that case, I do not think that it's the administration's job at all to start commenting on what is supposed to be the political discourse. And in terms of journalism, people have their freedom of speech. They're allowed to say whatever they want. I don't think that the White House should get involved with what journalists have to say, or opinion writers, I guess.
Guy Benson, you've been all over this story over at Town Hall. What do you make of this? Should the media get a free pass from the president?
Well, look, I think the question is, what did Vice President Biden actually say? And there were multiple sources. If you talk to Jim Vandehei, as he said later in the segment that you played a snippet of on Morning Joe, he said that he had 3 or 4 Democrat sources in a Democrat-filled room who said the Vice President of the United States used that language. I was happy to see Jay Carney come out and say there's no place for that in our political discourse. I think the whole episode is pretty distressing and kind of depressing more than anything else, and it's the hypocrisy that gets to me more than the actual language itself.
All right, Guy, I want to read something to you from Michael Gerson. Here's what he said about this hate fest over at the Washington Post. Tossing around a word like terrorist, he wrote, slips a little more poison into our political discourse, but so does the taking of exaggerated offense, the political equivalent of flailing in dramatic reaction to a basketball foul. Even if the right has every reason to be outraged, why not just ignore the distraction? Why not say, look, we're all doing so well that all they've got is you're Satan, and just keep pounding away at the president?
Well, I think it's not necessarily just a distraction that should be shrugged off and ignored when an entire end of the political spectrum is being tarred as terrorists. Terrorist is a very strong word with understandably deeply negative connotations because terrorists use violence to inflict harm and damage and chaos and death on people to advance a political or an ideological or religious cause. That bears no resemblance to the Tea Party. It bears no resemblance to the Republican Party. And to just sit back and allow that narrative to develop, as it did from the left-wing blogosphere to Politico to the New York Times to members of Congress to probably the vice president, I think just letting that slide and not pointing out that A, it's completely beyond the pale, and B, these are the same civility police who were screaming after the Gabrielle Giffords shooting based on scant evidence that there was any rhetoric issue there. I think that would have done a disservice, frankly, to the national discourse, just to sit back and do absolutely nothing.
Okay, so Alyona, what do you make of that? I mean, doesn't this bother you personally? Isn't this the kind of language that just makes American politics as bad as it could possibly be?
I mean, not really. What can I say? I think that this entire thing is overblown. I think that we would all be better off if we did just sit back and probably ignore a statement like this, because how many times can we have a conversation about rhetoric out there and how it's becoming so heated? We haven't reached some pinnacle or some climax in American history where rhetoric has just become beyond control. This has always existed. There's always been this vile talk in our political discourse, and it's always been directed from one party to the other, and we do see what I consider this fake outrage, because we've seen it many times coming from the Republican Party as well. It's also not okay to start calling somebody like the president a Nazi, right? You're complaining about somebody calling the Tea Party a terrorist organization. Do I think that they're terrorists? Do I think that they've been inflicting violence upon random civilians? Absolutely not. But has the left wing then been committing genocide on millions of people for their religion? Absolutely not. The entire thing, I think, needs to be ignored, because then we sit here and we have these conversations, and this is something that, quite frankly, I've ignored on my show, and we just overblow it. And guess what? The only people that actually care about this are the media. It's Washington, D.C., it's New York, it's every writer and blogger and every news host out there. Average Americans, they don't care.
All right, look, here's why this matters to me. This is what the meat of the issue is for me. Let me just get this out. Tea Party caucus in Congress is not like a renegade cabal, right? They're actual representatives. They won their elections fair and square. You can't have a working democracy if political movements, whether they're on the right or whether they're on the left, like the Progressive Caucus, are delegitimized for advancing their agenda in politics. That's the connection, right, Alyona?
Well, you know, if you want to call them delegitimizing them, I think that there's a lot of critique that is to be had, perhaps, on the Tea Party towards Republicans, especially. I think actually the Tea Party caucus and their entire role in this debt debate has been overblown a little bit, because if you think about it, and I am going to use another figure of speech that's been thrown out there a lot, is that our economy was being held hostage over this entire debt debate. But I think that it had less to do with the Tea Party than with the actual Republican leadership, because the Tea Party, and we were just discussing this last night on my program, they're not an anti-tax party. They just don't want any more spending. The people that are the anti-tax party, that is the Republican leadership right now. They're the ones that refuse to compromise by any means. And so I think that they actually played a much larger role in the Tea Party, and the Tea Party has just become an easy scapegoat for each party, both for the Democrats and for the Republican leadership that wants to act like they suddenly have their hands tied by some renegades within their own party, and so now they have to learn how to come to terms with them and make everybody happy, and it's all fake.
Respond to this?
Well, so many things to say. First of all, it was the President of the United States who walked away from the first bipartisan deal 2 weekends ago that had been forged among John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, and Harry Reid. So if we want to talk about holding things hostage and people stepping away, and there were a lot of Democrats who voted against the plan, and you even had folks like Paul Krugman coming out and saying, well, even though I've been screaming about default and holding hostage, now I don't like the deal, so I would vote against it, and it'd be better than nothing. So both parties were playing with this in a major way. I would argue that the economy is being held hostage.
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that.
But, okay, let me just finish the other point here, which is I don't think, to use your word, this was necessarily overblown. And first of all, find me a major mainstream Republican leader who has called President Obama Hitler. I haven't seen that. If they have, I'd love to hear it, and I would absolutely condemn it because it would be wildly inappropriate. The reason that I think this is a relevant discussion is because, yes, calling the Tea Party terrorist is absolutely odious, totally irresponsible and reckless and factually kind of crazy. But you had the entire establishment left, after the Gabrielle Giffords shooting in Tucson, join in a chorus of disapproval of angry, hateful, conservative rhetoric. Paul Krugman, to bring him up again, wrote a column called The Climate of Hate. The New York Times editorial board inveighing against conservatives for allowing talk radio and the blogs to get crazy and demonize opponents. And this may have contributed to the shooting, and that turned out to be false, but that was their narrative. They stuck to it, and they tried to smear an entire political movement to try to silence and muzzle us, to get us to think twice about what we were saying, because someone might shoot someone. And then 6-7 months later, they're not getting their way on an economic policy dispute, and they start screaming that people that are blocking what they want to see happen are terrorists, duly elected members of Congress, millions of peace-loving citizens who have never, ever threatened to harm anyone except through the ballot box. I mean, the hypocrisy and the cognitive dissonance is striking.
Alyona, you got the last word.
Sure. I mean, for starters, I don't think you can say that anybody in our country has never harmed anyone, considering also that it's the Republican Party that constantly wants us to wage war all over the world, and that keeps on going. But you know what? I mean, call me a bad liberal. I wasn't outraged. I wasn't part of that chorus after the Gabrielle Giffords shooting, after the entire incident that we saw in Tucson. I thought that that as well was hypocritical, and I think that we see it on both sides of the party. And what I really wish that the media would do, instead of go after what someone might have called something a terrorist or a Satan sandwich, is I wish that they would call people out on their actual lies that they try to spread as fact. That's what we see on the media, right? That's what you see organizations like Fox News doing all the time when they try to say that, well, okay, maybe not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslim. Those are things that you need to correct when they're trying to spread lies. If you want to sit there and pick apart their rhetoric, go ahead, but don't make that big of a fuss about it when you should be focusing on what Americans might be believing because they're being sold it as truth rather than a figure of speech or a metaphor that may or may not fit the glove.
Got it. We got to wrap it up here.
Right, like
I think we can all come down on the side of truth in journalism, even though we might disagree on the details. There is your Reform School panel. Guy Benson of townhall.com. Follow him over at twitter.com/GuyP. Don't forget the P, Benson. And Alyona Minkovski, host of The Alyona Show on RT. Tweeting as well at twitter.com/TheAlyona Show. Don't forget the Y. With a hand this bad, it's no surprise that panicking liberals are playing the terrorism card. It's about the only one they've got left. So go ahead, be disgusted. But don't miss the lesson here. The left is falling back on a scare tactic that's being rendered obsolete by the very economic crisis that their approach to governance has brought about. Terror is no longer the most terrifying threat Americans face. Try as they might, no pack of jihadists can irreparably wreck our country the way we can wreck our country. As Europe teeters on the edge of disaster, we're waking up to a painful truth. The international political economy created by some of the smartest liberals of all time is, well, I almost want to say it's a suicide vest. The timer is ticking and it's ready to blow. What do you call the people who want to clear the room before the bomb goes off? Terrorists? Hostage takers? Please, we're already hostages to a failed economic system and the politics that's propped it up. Breaking free might be extreme, but it's the opposite of evil. That's Reform School. I'm James Poulos. School is out.